Hello, my name is Terrence Bennett, and I'm going to give a talk about the North Bay Shipping Corridor. Um, I'm a member of the Benicia Historical Society, and this is an event coordinated through them. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. So I think it's helpful first to give a little bit of background about myself. I trained at the Naval Academy. My background is with the United States Navy. I served as a gunnery officer aboard this big ship here in the middle. It is called a DDG, Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. I was also an engineering officer. And then I actually became an intelligence officer. In college, actually, I sailed aboard this tall ship. It's the Juan Sebastian Elcano. It's the training ship out of the Spanish Navy. So anyway, I say all that to say that that's my background. I'm not a historian by trade. That's not the intent of this presentation. As you'll see, the intent of this presentation is to think big picture about shipbuilding in this region and ultimately why this region saw such a tremendous amount of shipbuilding. In engineering work, they teach you there's a common form of root cause analysis, which is simply a process of asking why. And I think there's some interesting sort of parallels around that and intelligence work. In intelligence, you're trying to really understand at a deep level why something's happening, and understand it sort of to a level where you can start to think 2-3 steps ahead. And that's kind of how I guess I think about history as well, as I try and get down to the root cause of why things happened in certain places. You know, it's often gives you a level of depth into the circumstances that led to events. So let's start by talking about where is the North Bay Shipping Corridor. As you can see from this Google map, I dropped a bunch of points. We've got Richmond all the way out here, Mare Island, Benicia, actually 2 sites in Benicia, Matthew Turner Shipyard and the repair facility for the Pacific steamboats, and then Pittsburgh, Antioch, and Stockton. Stockton is 80 miles inland from the strait, but it gives you a sense of breadth of how big we're talking about. And then you also can see the very cool map that I found. Clearly, it was a map intended to predict or to display Pittsburgh here, but you can see the entire. You see the strait. You can see all the rail lines, inland waterways, and then Mount Diablo, which we'll talk about later. But it gives you a sense of the breadth of the rail system and some of the natural resources. So then the question is, why here? Sort of the intent of this presentation is to give a hypothesis, or to present a hypothesis and try and prove it. And so I think there's 3 key advantages to this region, which led to the significant amount of shipbuilding we saw. First, a strategic rail corridor that predated shipbuilding across Stockton. Stockton's on sort of a north-south corridor, but also an east-west corridor that protrudes through into Antioch, Pittsburgh, and then there's a rail corridor that goes from the north that comes down into Benicia, connecting with Mare Island, and then there's the Solano Ferry that connected Benicia with Port Costa across the strait. And then Richmond was an extension of that Stockton rail line through Antioch and Pittsburgh. Additionally, and it's worth really noting, there's a massive amount of shipping that actually happened on the waterways as well. So it's important to consider the waterways as a shipping corridor as well. The Carquinez Strait is also a relatively calm yet deep water port, ideal for shipbuilding. Right? If you can imagine laying planks of wood along a shallow kind of flat shore and trying to build a ship, the lapping waves, wind can become a hindrance pretty quickly, and that's what you get in large parts of the rest of the bay. Um, we also had it also meant that you could get goods in and out of this area from the ocean, from ocean shipping lines. And then I think, one of the kind of most important pieces of the puzzle that brings it all home is the incredible amount of resources in this region, from the coal from Black Diamond Mine in Mount Diablo to iron from the Sierra Nevadas and lumber from the vast forests of Northern California. All that converged on these rail lines already, and it made the perfect place to start to actually build with those resources. It's important to first mention the Native American tradition, who, amongst the first visitors to this region, we saw they saw the Native Americans using the waterways with these traditional types of Tule canoes to traverse the Carquinez Strait, and so this these waterways being calm and it's sort of a connective network across the region was not lost on the native peoples, and the archaeological record supports that pretty well. So as the first European settlers came here, 1875 through 1848, we saw this whole region become a strategic area for trade, for anchorages, and we saw the early use of timber from Northern California for shipbuilding across this corridor. And it's worth noting as well, the Spanish and the English who came here were kind of a seagoing people, right? Maritime heritage was a key part of the people who came here, and so it's not surprising that they would have looked for opportunities to build ships from an early standpoint. That's exactly what we see. This sort of early maritime period stops in 1848 because of the discovery of gold, and so what that ushers in is this massive gold rush, and that is. That brings tons of people and tons of, frankly, capital to this region to build out that network of rail, but also the use of rivers and thus ships to exploit the resources across this area. And you have the building of the Pacific Mail Steamship Repair Facility in Benicia, which is sort of emblematic of that. You also have a massive influx of skilled labor and people. It's always fascinating to stop and think about the kind of people who would have chopped what they were doing in the 1840s and 50s to come out west to this kind of incredibly dangerous and kind of intense place in pursuit of gold and a new start. And I think it sort of speaks to the workforce that we see through the following decades and century. And so this is the part of the presentation where I'm going to really jump into, I'm following this sort of chronological order, but I'm going to jump through and talk about specific shipyards, really trying to tie back this larger narrative around the role of rail, ocean access, and resources in the building out of this region. I'm going to start with the Pacific Mail repair facility, and then the Turner shipyards as well. This isn't meant to be sort of a deep dive into any of these locations. There's some incredible work done specifically on Matthew Turner shipyard by Alan Gandy, a local Benitian, but the intent of this is to stay kind of high level, right? The Benicia Pacific Mail Depot opened in the 1850s, right? It was a machine shop, foundry, had coaling docks, and was key to the early building out of a professional workforce in this region, and that would carry over to Matthew Turner Shipyard. And this facility maintained all the boats for the for the Panama to San Francisco route, and then the Inland River and coastal routes as well. This was the only picture I could find of a Pacific Mail steamship facility. I couldn't find one of Benicia from that period. That site has turned over 3 times before being retired, and so the structures I do have pictures of may not actually have been there in that period. It's worth noting, I sort of skipped over this. I'm including this sort of legend here to discuss the key resources through the different these different periods, right? So here's a good example, sort of early maritime conditions. This is sort of before rail. Rail came in the early 1800s. So rail played a factor, but obviously access to the global sea routes and lumber were sort of key. It's worth noting as well, by 1860, so a little bit after this, the Humboldt Bay mills saw 30 million board feet per year coming from the forests of Northern California, largely for shipbuilding. So just give you sort of the scale and breadth of the amount of redwood and Douglas fir coming out of the forest. And so here you see the early convergence of the use of deep water ports, the need of rail and local resources as a hub for shipbuilding. And what's really interesting about Matthew Turner specifically as part of this larger conversation around shipbuilding in the region is he was an incredible innovator. He was almost like the R&D skunkworks for fast wooden shipbuilding. And it's important to note that when you're shipping goods around the world, around the Pacific in this era, being first to market's key, right? So if everyone gets the first harvest of pineapples out of Hawaii, for instance, if you can get them onto the docks of San Francisco, 3-4 days before your competitors, you're going to be making a lot more money. And that's what his ships were known to be able to do. And a lot of Turner's apprentices evangelized his approach to both shipbuilding and sail building. And we can actually see that carry through in the following decades to Mare Island, specifically, obviously not quite far from us, and the way they were building ships. So it's, when you have a concentration of shipbuilding in a region, it's not just, you end up creating sort of an ecosystem of ideas as well as goods. And Benicia became a quick economic hub for shipbuilding, the ancillary maritime industries that go along with it, and as a key piece of our identity. It's also worth noting that the Benicia Port Costa Solano train ferry, which operated from 1879 to 1930, was a key sort of part of that rail connection as well. So created this sort of unbroken mainline link of iron, coal, and steel supplies across the region. And this is a good opportunity to stop and talk about coal. So this is a really cool map that shows you Mount Diablo here, where they found coal in the 1840s as well, and between 1850 and 1906, 4 million tons of coal were mined out of Mount Diablo, and it was California's biggest source of steam coal. 3 dedicated mine railroads dumped directly into barges along the strait, and the docks and boilers of Mare Island. So I think the map does a great job of sort of discussing that. And once again, like, this is a key enabler to the region, and allowed for this place just to be the ideal place to build ships and to resupply ships and maintain ships. So we're going to sort of pivot now and talk about Mare Island through its life, and we'll pivot through to a few more shipyards. So Mare Island, founded in 1854, slightly after the Benicia Pacific Mail Repair Depot, obviously known and selected for its strategic deep water ports. The first ship launched in 1859. Their first submarine actually launched in 1902 with the name USS Grampus, which I think is a great name. It became a center for skilled labor and building ships across the West Coast. So very key strategic port for the Navy, for what it's worth, first port west of the Rocky Mountains as well. And so, following through to the 1890s, you've got the building of the first steamships. The Monadnock was built in response to early tensions with the Spanish in 1896, and then the USS Intrepid was the first steel ship laid in 1904. Mare Island was on the railroad lines, which is key. They actually built a bunch of custom specific railroad lines that kind of last mile spur, which shuttled armored plate, guns, and workers from the Vallejo Depot to every shop in the bay by 1891. So rail was a key enabler for the building out of steel ships in Mare Island specifically. And obviously, a lot of the local coal came from the black diamond mines and steel from the from a bunch of different forges in the area. With World War I, you saw massive expansion of Mare Island, really kind of leaning on the infrastructure that made it a good place in the first place. Just throw out some of the numbers, right? The yard retrofitted 13 destroyers and 34 submarines, building the Ward-class destroyer in a record 17 and a half days. This is, in World War One. Those numbers actually dropped significantly during World War II, and grew to a peak of 10,000 employees. With World War II expansion, we saw even, we saw the shipyard grow to 50,000 workers, and an incredible amount of production. For those of you who may not know, with the attack on Pearl Harbor, Mare Island became one of the most significant and strategic sites in the entire world for the United States. Only Mare Island could have and was able to rebuild the Pacific Fleet to win the Pacific Campaign in World War II, and so it's absolutely incredible feat. What was the size and breadth that Mare Island was taken to during those years. With the Cold War, the base continued to maintain its high op tempo, building their first nuclear submarine in 1954, and continuing to do submarine maintenance through the entire Cold War until the base was started getting shut down in the 80s and 90s. The base closed in 1996 as part of BRAC, and it had an incredibly huge effect on Vallejo, needless to say. And there have been a number of redevelopment initiatives in the region, in the area, and there's a lot of rezoning done to make Mare Island residential. There's a lot of sort of recreational areas now as well. There's been a tremendous amount of heritage and historic preservation, and needless to say, environmental sort of cleanup as well. So that's a theme that we're going to touch on again. So now sort of shifting to the Pacific Coast Shipbuilding operation in Pittsburgh, 1918, excuse me. So during the Emergency Fleet Act, a bunch of shipyards were built very quickly, including this one in Pittsburgh. They built 10 merchant hulls while operational, and what was an early sort of example of the type of shipbuilding we're going to see during World War II. Its location in Sassoon Bay was really strategic. It's a deep water port that was ideal for shipbuilding and launching. Once again, its access to that existing corridor was key. I actually learned a bunch about rails during preparing this presentation. There's both the Santa Fe and SP twin mains, which parallel the strait, and have been there since 1900. The Santa Fe rail line actually laid a short spur directly into the Pacific Coast shipyard in 1918. So plates, beams, and boilers could roll right off of flat cars and onto into production the same day. This is the kind of sort of enablement that rail does for large operations. Additionally, Pittsburgh had Columbia Steel established in 1910, the largest foundry west of the Rocky Mountains, and was rolling out 10,000 tons per month of steel by 1920, which was key for the Pacific Coast shipbuilding operation, but for a number of shipbuilding operations during World War II as well. And so once again, we sort of have the enablement of deep water access, the rail lines, and resources as keys to this entire operation. To touch on that, one of the things that's really interesting is the diversification and expansion of the workforce during this time. And we'll touch on this more actually with the Kaiser shipyard as well, but really, really interesting. Just kind of fundamentally changing the both society but also the region during this time. This shipyard closed 3 years later, or 3 years after opening, with the end of the World War One, and this entire site ended up getting demolished and turned into the Concord Naval Weapons Station. So nothing is left of it except for Clyde, which is a small town just south of it, which is still there. So moving along, the Kaiser shipyards, Kaiser Richmond shipyards opened in 1941. And were incredibly innovative for their day. I'm actually reading a really interesting book that talks a lot about Kaiser, called Freedom's Forge, and a lot of the techniques that Kaiser applied in this shipyard came from the automotive plants, right? So the idea of using prefabricated module sections, which is what we still do today, and a lot of other techniques were able to drastically reduce construction time. Between 1941 and 45, 747 Liberty and Victory ships were built. Record launch time of only 4 days per ship. And we saw a lot of just innovative techniques being used during that time as well. This as well had an incredible effect on the workforce and composition. We saw as the Kaiser shipyards go from 0 to nearly 100,000 workers in 36 months, including about 30% women, 15% African Americans, which was just transformational for its day. A lot of innovative training and production. So if you think up to this point, almost everyone learned through apprenticeship slowly over time, and we saw really innovative training techniques to be able to get people into production very, very quickly. And you can't underestimate the social impact and legacy this has had on our society and our region. One really interesting anecdote is the Kaiser health program comes from this shipyard, and the need to just be able to give employees good health care to keep them working. And so we have Kaiser shipyards to thank for the Kaiser Health Plan. Much like the other rail shipyards I spoke of that built up very quickly during time of war, Richmond rapidly declined after World War II, and went through a tough but swift transition into automotive manufacturing and other uses. And there's been a tremendous effort to preserve a lot of the history there. If you haven't been to the museum at the Richmond Shipyard, I highly recommend it. Rosie the Riveter Museum, I think it's called. It's fantastic. The Fulton shipyards in Antioch opened in the interwar years, 1924, but really got accelerated during World War II, building rescue tugs and aggressive class minesweepers. They really kind of stuck to their roots in wooden shipbuilding. Minesweepers need to be wooden because many mines are actually will react to the magnetism of the hull, and so there's we see it here and we see it in Stockton as well. The preservation of wooden shipbuilding for this specific purpose. This shipyard transitioned into building harbor tugs and dredge tenders post-World War II, but unfortunately closed in 1999 with a drastic reduction in demand. We'll speak a little bit to that at the end of the presentation as well. Moving along, Stockton had multiple shipyards during World War II, played a really strategic role in building dry docks and LST barges, essentially large sort of platforms needed for amphibious operations, along with wooden minesweepers. And they actually built 80 miles of inland canals specifically to enable these shipyards, and over 10,000 workers at its peak. The Stockton Deepwater Channel was dredged to 26 feet in 1933 and 35 feet later on in the 80s. So floating dry docks and Liberty ship sections could travel 80 miles inland during World War II. I found this really cool poster from the era talking about some of the trying to hire for some of the shipyards. And Stockton, like many of these towns, had a huge ecosystem of firms supporting the shipbuilding effort. I found over 100 different companies. But post-war, without those government contracts, many of them had to retool and change to support new industries. And Stockton was sort of an agricultural hotbed before, and went back to primarily ag post World War II. So just at a high level, all of this had a tremendous effect on the entire region, employing tens of thousands of workers in many of these places. The Richmond shipyards employing nearly 100,000. Stockton specifically, the shipyards made up 10% of the entire population. And it fundamentally changed the way our country thought about who worked and who didn't, who garnered a wage and who didn't. And as mentioned, the Kaiser shipyards employed about 30% women and 15% African Americans. Here's a timeline just talking through the different shipyard openings and closings. So Pittsburgh was short-lived, while Mare Island was open for nearly 150 years, 1854 to 1996. So really, really interesting. So we're going to sort of stop talking about the shipyards and kind of pivot back to talking about kind of at a high level the region and specifically preserving and learning from the past. This is a great example of some of the buildings in Mare Island that were repurposed, in this case for a banquet hall. It's a great museum, by the way. And it's worth sort of highlighting the fact that a lot of this was because of emergency measures during war. Federal contracts were a key driver, accounting for over 90% of payroll during wartime. I think it was specifically the Kaiser shipyards. We saw a massive amount of technological advancement and labor innovations brought to shipbuilding during this time. And a lot was also enabled via regional industrial policy, right? So a lot of it was at the federal government's behest, but the California and the region as a whole really stepped in to figure out how to bring the war effort, to contribute to the war effort through shipbuilding and other manufacturing. On the other side of that, right, the decline of shipbuilding starting in the 60s and through the 1990s really was about global competition. And we saw this across the country, across a lot of manufacturing sectors. There was a eagerness to actually kind of push a lot of this manufacturing to Asia, specifically Japan, South Korea, now China. There's a huge push towards automation, like the use of welding robots that just weren't catching on in American shipyards, and we sort of fell behind. And that led ultimately to these shipyards having to close. Those that did hold on were really kind of focused around a lot of dredging and sort of maintenance type operations to support the existing ship lines. Both Sacramento and Stockton have large agricultural kind of focused ports, and keeping those open and operational was key. And then, of course, we've got a bunch of refineries in this region, and keeping dredging operations open and keeping those waterways navigable has been key to this region. Needless to say, there's a huge environmental cost to a lot of this. We didn't really have an appreciation at the time of some of the compounds we're using and their effect on the environment. And there's been a multi-decade effort to clean them up. both here but across the bay as well. South San Francisco, Sunnyvale, Alameda. We're here as part of the Historical Society, and so historic preservation has been was a key thing I was looking at as well, right? Not just maritime heritage preservation, but the preservation of key sites. This is in my acknowledgments, but I was really blown away by a lot of the historic research and preservation that's happened at a lot of these sites that I just wouldn't have been able to find anything about a lot of these shipyards if it weren't for the hard work of local historic societies and museums to preserve this information. And then lastly, I think education and the cultural impact we can bring this information to bear is key to why I'm giving this presentation, because I stumbled across this information on my own and I wanted to share it. But I encourage any of you that are passionate about this work to share it as well. And then sort of coming up at the end here, this is a slide I added at the very last minute because I saw some fascinating parallels that I wanted to touch on. I told you I was in the Navy. A few of my good friends are still very active in the Navy, in the sort of Navy defense sort of ecosystem. And there's actually a huge revival of shipbuilding happening today. This is part of the reason why I got really into this subject, because I was sort of connecting the past and today, and reading books like Freedom's Forge, trying to kind of understand our legacy and shipbuilding to think about it and kind of understand the future. And in Kaiser's, Richmond Shipyard, and other shipyards, the single greatest constraint was always skilled labor, specifically skilled welders. The Richmond Shipyard grew to 90,000 workers in 36 months, and it led to a 5x in payroll of Maryland welders at the time. There just wasn't enough skilled labor to go around. And I think it's a really interesting kind of parallel to today. The Columbia and Virginia class submarines built out of Groton, Connecticut, are way behind schedule. The shipyards down in San Diego and Louisiana are way behind schedule as well because of the lack of specifically welders, but other skilled trades as well. And so there's very specific welding schools actually the Navy's helped fund to address this. We actually have a welding school in Benicia that they're not NAVC certified, but they're thinking about this as well. And we are training welders at the Solano Community College and other local universities. But there's definitely more of a need than ever for these skilled laborers, skilled roles. So lastly, wanted to thank the Benicia Historical Society and the library for supporting me in this. This has been a really fun project to research, and as I mentioned, I wanted to thank all the local historical societies and museums that have preserved a lot of this heritage for people like me to stumble across online and research. So with that, I will stop.